Hi class, so I wanted to talk about creating online forms for a minute. This is on page 240 in your book and it's stage 2 of project 5. So online forms are used to collect information from the user and then transfer that information to web servers or to the email of the website administrator. So there's a few different ways you can set it up. You can create surveys, you can sell e-commerce, so like have a checkout and have people enter their information for that to purchase items or downloads. You can create guest books, polls, membership applications. All of those utilize the form, the HTML form technology. And we want to make sure that we design really good forms that don't require too much information from the user, but are just enough to get what we need. We also want to make sure that our forms are secure, especially if you're going to do e-commerce with any kind of credit card processing. There are more secure ways to do that, so I'm going to kind of talk about that a little bit. So to create a form in HTML, you're going to go into your document, and this is just a blank document here. I'm going to go to Insert, and there's another section of the HTML or the Insert panel called Form, and that's what you want to go to. So all of these are related to forms. So the first one you want to click on is Form, which is going to put the form tag in the body of your document. Notice it doesn't have any content to it yet. You can call it whatever you want. If you have multiple forms, you're going to need to use a form ID. So that will be important if you're going to have more than one form on your website. The action is what happens when the user submits the form. So that's going to be important. And then the method is also important, get versus post. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. So once you create your form, you can add different attributes to it that collect information. So if you click inside the form, let's just say we want to collect somebody's name, okay? So if we click on text, that's going to insert a text field, and it actually inserts some text, like a label in front of it. So notice that in the code down here, it put the label tag, and it also put the input tag. So the input is the actual box that they're going to type in, and the label is what's labeling that box. And notice that they have the same name. So the label is for text field, and the name of this box is text field. So you want to make sure that you give those two things the same name, basically. Okay. So in place of text field, we're going to change that to say name. And then we can go down here in our properties, and we can also change the name of it. So right now it's called text field. We can change that to say name, or we could do first name, like that. Okay, so first name and first name. It changed it on both for us. Okay, so now let's go click after that text box and press enter, and it will create a new paragraph. And let's do their email address. So if you click email, this one already has a label of email with it. And some of the different fields that you insert in a form can include validation. And what that means is that when they click submit, the browser is going to look through the form and make sure that they've entered their information correctly. So when you have validation for email, it's actually looking for the @ symbol and an email address. So it's making sure that it looks like an email address. So if you want to include that validation, you just keep this selected and check the required box. And it's going to add to the code right here. It'll say required equals required. That means that the form is going to check when they click submit, it's going to check if they entered an email address. It doesn't know if it's a real email address or not, but it knows by determining if there's that @ sign involved. So this prevents robots from filling out the form. Has to be hopefully a real person. You can set like a max length of the form field. You can tell it to autocomplete, which is going to, it's kind of like what Google does when you start typing something and then more ideas pop up underneath. That's autocomplete. You can also change it to read only. Autofocus goes to that field when the browser loads. So there's a lot of different settings in here that you can play around with. I'm going to go ahead and click after the email field and press enter again. Sometimes you may want to use a select button, so like a drop down menu. If you go down towards the bottom, you have the option of a select menu. You also have the option of radio buttons and a radio button group, or you have the option of a checkbox or a checkbox group. So some of those are going to be helpful if they're selecting a certain thing. So let's add a select menu here. And it brings up that little box with the drop down arrow. We don't have anything in the list values yet. Okay, so here's what it added to our code: label, select, and then a select button with the name select and the ID select. And then it closes. And then inside of that tag, we're going to add our list values. But first, let's decide what we want them to select. So let's say, instead of just select, let's say pick your favorite color. Okay, and then we go down, click in the select tag, or select this box, and then you can go down to the bottom and it says list values in the properties panel. So click on that. So the item label is a short code that you want to use. So we could use all lowercase letters. So we want to say red, and then the actual value is capitalized. So you just add all your values here. Okay, and then you click OK. And then you have in your drop down menu, you can test it out if you're in live view. So there's all our options, okay? Yeah, so when they get to this page, it's going to say red as the default, and then if they click on here, they can change it to a different one. Okay. Let's go back to split view. Okay, I'm going to add another line after this. Sorry, I gotta go back to design view. There we go. Let's say we want them to choose something. So one radio button isn't really gonna do anything. If you use a radio button group though, you can call it whatever you want. Let's just say how did you hear? And we'll just call this how did you hear about us, okay? So let's say they heard about us on the radio, internet, we can add more up here, TV, you can add as many as you want, and then click OK. So it asks them to select one of those three. And I would go ahead and put a little paragraph above that that says, how did you hear about us? Otherwise, that's going to be confusing if you don't label it. So this is kind of just how you want to go through and create a form. At the end of your form, you want to always include a submit button. So you have the option of clicking submit button over there. All it does is it puts an input tag and the type of it is submit. If you want to change what it says instead of submit, you can actually make that say something else. And you can add another option that would actually reset the form if you wanted to do that as well. I would recommend having the reset button before the submit button. Otherwise, it could get confusing. So upon pressing the enter button, you need to click on the enter button or the submit button. This is what you want to fill in right here, form action. So the form action is what it tells the form what to do with all the data that was entered in the form. So most of the time that's going to be an email address that you put in there, and you would type mail to whatever your email is. That is going to send you an email when somebody submits the form, and it's going to include all of the information that they filled out in the form. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the form method real quick. So get versus post. So get attaches form data to the URL of the action page that processes the form data. This method limits the amount of and format of data that can be passed to the action page. So get is the method of submission that Google uses when you do a Google search. Let me show you. So if I search for something, I can look up here in the URL and I can see that it has all this gobbledygook, and then it has colors, which is what I actually typed in. Okay. So that's the get method of submitting a form. The post method of submitting a form sends the form data as a standard input to the action page. This method does not impose any limits on the pass data. So the post method is if you want to submit more data through the form. Also, if you want to have the data be secure, because if somebody's entering a password or a credit card number, you do not want to use the get method because it's going to put that number in, or their password in the URL. Okay, so post is the more secure method of form submission. Okay, so there's a lot of different settings and variations within forms. You're going to get a chance to create your own in Project 5. So I'll go ahead and just stop there for now, but I wanted you to see sort of how basic form building works. You can actually go in and style each of these different fields and the labels and stuff like that. So if you wanted to style, let's just say you didn't like the font of all the labels, okay? So if you have a CSS document that's attached, you can go to that and just type label and font family, and then pick your new font family that you want, followed by a semicolon. And then let's just say font weight, bold, font color, sorry, not font color, just color. Let's make it brown. Okay. So if I click back up here, notice how all my labels just changed. This one is not technically a label. This one's just a paragraph, so that's why it didn't change. You can also change the display of your submit button. So the submit button is an input tag, and it has an ID of submit. So that's what you want to call when you are in the CSS document. So if it has an ID of submit in your CSS document, you use the hashtag to call an ID, hashtag submit. And then you can change whatever you want to change about your button. So let's say we want the width to be bigger. Okay, so that changes the width. Let's say we want padding all the way around so that it looks like a button. And then you can also change the background color of your button. That didn't work. Oh, I think it's because it already has a default gradient on there, so you can go in and change stuff, but some of it's going to stay the same. So if you do this, you can type it, or you can go over to your CSS designer and then you can pick some different properties and stuff like that. So it might be easier to do it over here from the CSS designer. You can just kind of decide, but if there's something specific you want, you might want to just type it. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of information about how to style your forms and how to create a form.